Hello and welcome to the Arthur B. Morrow Institute for Peace and Justice at St. Paul's College and the University of Manitoba. My name is Jason Brennan. I'm the manager of the Morrow Institute, and I welcome you to today's lecture. The University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Iniwak, Dakota Oyate, and Dene, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past. We dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thank you for attending today. This is the first of 3 fall term brown bag lectures. Please visit our website to see descriptions and find registration links and recordings for future lectures, and also links to videos of past lectures. Today's lecture is taking place online and in person. The lecture is being recorded for future broadcast on the Morrow Institute YouTube channel. The lecture will include 35 to 40-minute presentation followed by question and answer session. And for our online participants, I ask you to type your questions into the Q&A box in the Zoom platform. It is my great pleasure to welcome our guest lecturer today. Tina Greenfield is a colleague and friend here at St. Paul's College for the 10 years that I've known her. She's been venturing into some of the most difficult conflict regions in the ancient world in pursuit of her research and preservation efforts. Just a little side story, the lab that she works out of is directly beneath our offices at the Morrow Institute. And one day I put a giant jug of water on our water cooler and it leaked down into the lab. And half an hour later, they came running upstairs and I was personally responsible for putting at risk antiquity. But it was averted. It was averted. It's always, now it's in my mind all the time. Don't leak the water. But Tina Greenfield is an archaeologist whose interests lie in the earliest cities and empires of the ancient world. She received her PhD from the University of Cambridge and has taught Mesopotamian archaeology at the University of Cambridge as well as at the University of Winnipeg more recently. She's co-director of the Near Eastern and Biblical Archaeology Lab here at the University of Manitoba, my neighbor, and she's participated in field projects in Canada, Europe, South Africa, Turkey, Iraq, and Israel. Additionally, in her role as the environmental coordinator for the University of Cambridge and British Museum-based projects, she has helped train local Iraqi archaeologists in excavating and documenting cultural heritage damage at sites in Iraqi Kurdistan, in Northern Iraq, and in Southern Iraq at Tel Aviv. She continues to work with numerous other Near East excavation projects, including with the University of Chicago at Nippur in Southern Iraq, the University of Akron at the Sabitu project in Northern Iraq, and Ariel University in Israel at Tel Burna. I invite and welcome our friend, Dr. Tina Greenfield, to the Brown Bag Lecture podium.
Thank you so much, Jason. And I'm going to be doing a tag team here because we have a little bit of a difference in presentation modes. And so I will be clicking here and clicking here. So please excuse if there is a slight delay in the presentation. So first off, I want to very much thank the organizers of the Brown Bag Lunch series. When they first asked me, of course, I was happy to give them all the information based on this talk. It's very timely, and so thank you, Jason and Stanley, who's not here, unfortunately, and of course, St. Paul's College for hosting this fabulous institute. So without further ado, by this slide, you will notice that with the title of my presentation, I'm speaking very specifically about the destruction of cultural heritage in Iraq and Syria. I first began presenting this, and I think I actually did a presentation here back in 2015, when all the world knew about the destruction of archaeology by the hands of Daesh, or Islamic State. Back then, I was actively working in the region in northern Mesopotamia. However, I've now branched out into also southern Mesopotamia. Now, sadly, 2025, this presentation is still very much real, and we have moved on partially onto the level of actual active cultural preservation, but we are living in a time, obviously, of still continued global terrorism, and more specifically in the regions that I've been working in, the Middle East. So, as I say at every single one of these presentations that I do regarding this information, with the caveat, I am not a political scientist, I am an archaeologist. and I believe in saving cultural heritage. So this presentation is going to touch on basically who's the Islamic State, otherwise known as Daesh, because back in 2015, colleagues and the public really didn't understand what the motivation was for the events that were unfolding. Now, my experiences working in Iraq highlight the damage that Daesh has created in the region, and I'm placing it within an archaeological context because essentially that's what I study. The damage to particular sites will be explored in that region, and I will eventually get to highlighting international responses to cultural heritage management and archaeological site preservation via recent fieldwork, site activities that are happening, and training by myself and colleagues in the hopes that we can mitigate the destruction that Daesh wrought on this region. So I'm just going to put my timer on. Who exactly is Islamic State? IS, Islamic State, is a modern political entity or terror organization that exists primarily in northern and eastern Syria and northern Iraq. Its origins date back already to 1999 with the release of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, a jihadical radical individual from a Jordanian prison who set his sights on reforming and governing the Muslim countries of the Near East, but according to Islamic or Sharia law, and under one clear central Muslim ruler or caliph. It currently has global links, and I have to illustrate that one of those links, which is quite global and quite in our backyard, is that even in my old neighborhood of Winnipeg here, we have had links of Islamic State be recognized and identified. So we can very clearly see, based on the different affiliates we found in the Philippines, South Asia, North Central Africa, Saudi Peninsula, and even Canada. And I will speak further about their ideology as we move on in the presentation. So, for our purposes, as I said before, this presentation concentrates very clearly on Syria, Iraq, and Iraqi Kurdistan. Now, although the previous slides showed that this was global and their reach is very far indeed, I'm going to set us in this context to talk about the recent damage. So let me just show you here on the map. I apologize for those online. You can't see the red dot, but this is Iraqi Kurdistan, right on the border with Iran and Turkey. This is Iraq, northern Iraq, very specifically, and here is eastern Syria. You can see by the map where we are looking at present city-controlled or contested of Islamic State and some of the attacks. We'll get into this much more as we move forward, and you can see that none of that has happened in the Kurdish region. So let's look at the timeline of archaeology in these two regions. With the US invasion in 2003, all Iraqi excavations halted. Similarly, with the civil war in Syria in 2010, again, all excavations were halted. This meant the only region that was safe to conduct any archaeological research was Iraqi Kurdistan, a newly independent government located, again, by that map, in northeastern Iraq. International teams began to survey the regions, and in 2013, permits began to be issued for this region. For 2013 and 14, archaeological explorations of this region that had almost no modern excavations provided an incredible amount of new information on the antiquity of northern Mesopotamia. And I'll talk to you about some really famous sites that have come out of that region. Having worked in southeastern Turkey for the decade prior, I was really excited to work in this region. And these are just the archaeologists that first signed the new permits to do excavations in this region. So, for those of you who know me, and I think almost all of you do, my passion's archaeology. I have been fortunate to work in several countries that were not without their issues. Israel for the past 2 decades, Serbia in 1993-94 during the war, in South Africa starting in 1994, before and right after the fall of apartheid. Southeastern Turkey in the stronghold region of the PKK. So a sense of adventure is a running theme in my research. But I have to say, this past decade has truly topped my list of adventure, and heartache to be sure. What happened exactly during this time, you ask? Well, lots, but specifically related to this talk, Islamic State happened. So let me take you to where I started working in 2013. Now I'm giving you an archaeologist perspective of boots on the ground when I was actually there, and then we'll go and look at the actual damage that has happened. But beginning in 2013, my research concentrated, again, in that green region right here of Iraqi Kurdistan. So from the outset, even before Islamic State, I worked with teams in the US State Department and several universities and museums to begin training Iraqi archaeologists in new technologies and heritage management. So before even we had heard of Islamic State, because of the war with the US, there was an immense need for training for archaeologists and cultural heritage managers from museums. So I worked with the State Department funded projects by the University of Mosul, and that would have been this project right here. Excavations also with the museum and Boston University, and that would have been the Rowandoos archaeological project. That was right in the Zagros Mountains, right along the border with Iran. And German excavations in the Peshtar Plain, again, right beside the Iranian border. And finally, one of the biggest ones that I was involved with is the British Museum Iraqi Heritage Management Program, and that was really right down in this region here. And again, that was a massive program to train museum specialists, curators, heritage management, and archaeologists in both London and boots on the ground at archaeological sites. So this was a very, very busy time for research, but it was very short-lived. As I mentioned, Islamic State had very different plans for all of us as we moved forward past 2013. So what happened? As I mentioned, 2013, we had no inkling of what Islamic State was. But the time we were conducting our training in the capital city of Erbil in Kurdistan, and this is a picture of it with a massive citadel on it, our participants were coming from all over Kurdistan, but also Northern Iraq. There was a border at that point in time, and our colleagues were coming from the city of Mosul. Now, during our actual session with the training, our Mosul colleagues were told they had to leave immediately to get back to their city. Projects were being shut down and people were beginning to get out of Kurdistan. Islamic State was now in Mosul and the surrounding regions. Now you have to understand that this would have been normally a 2-hour drive, but because of all the roadblocks, it was now 8 hours drive to get back home. Our colleagues then were desperately trying to seek refuge in either the US or Europe, since Islamic State then declared their city as their capital on May 10th. I flew to southeastern Turkey to conduct other field work, but there was a problem with my visa and I wound back in Erbil at the end of June, exactly on the date that their leader, al-Baghdadi, decided to declare that the region was going to be a caliphate state, and he was going to be the one true leader of this. By this time, Islamic State was 30 kilometers away from the city, and what we would watch was Islamic State proceed with their program of terror and destruction while the world watched in horror. Archaeologists, however, were determined to save and record any information in preparation for these sites to be destroyed. So, while Islamic State was still at the height of its power in Syria and parts of Iraq, and research in those areas was impossible, Iraqi Kurdistan was not affected. And so in 2015, we all returned to that region. And we returned with the goals of preserving all these sites because we really had no idea if Islamic State was going to move into this region. We literally raced against the thought of Islamic State appearing and in destroying our sites at any time. So not only did we need to excavate, but we needed to train the local archaeologists on the spot and provide them with the tools to help protect and preserve their region's historical and cultural sites. And you can see here that the red areas were all Islamic State controlled all across the whole area. And again, here's Kurdistan. So, Islamic State, also known as ISIS, ISIL, and IC. Again, also known as Daesh. By December 2015, Daesh had conquered a vast area across northern Syria and Iraq. Daesh differed radically from other groups in its revolutionary political, religious agenda of restoring it to a caliphate. In enemies it targeted and its unique focus on performative destruction of people and heritage, this was a whole new world. Their core strategy of Daesh was to fuse basically politics, Islamic fundamentalism, espousing jihad or religiously sanctioned war against unbelievers, and the use of the internet in an unprecedented way as a weapon of war and a recruitment tool. And Daesh literally means one who crushes something underfoot. So the French were the first to say we are going to be calling the Islamic State this word because all the other words legitimize land acquisition or the place of land. And Islamic State did not like being referred to as Daesh. At its peak, Daesh controlled an estimated 8 to 12 million people in a caliphate that enforced its interpretation of Islamic law until its destruction as a territorial entity in 2019. And again, you can see, here's the map. This is Syria over here, Kurdistan in the yellow, southern Iraq here, and Daesh, their core or their heartland really was between the two. This is Raqqa, a picture of Raqqa, which was the capital city of Daesh in Syria. What was their goal? Their goal was to cleanse the region of idolatry through governance and reform via terrorism and destruction. As an archaeologist, the head of the Archaeology Institute in Germany, Van Es states, the destruction is nothing special. Wars have always done this, all throughout history. It's the way they present it to the world that's shocking and new. Make no mistake, the intent was ideological warfare with maximum effect. The performative nature is sophisticated and carefully curated via print, TV, and social media. They even have their own highly glossed magazine. And archaeological sites were one of the prime targets in its intent. The question remained, why archaeology? Islamic State conducted performative destruction or iconoclasm. Iconoclasm can be defined as the deliberate destruction of the material manifestations of a particular cultural heritage because they represent a particular doctrine or ideology. Essentially, the destruction of people, places, and things thought to be idolatrous. Images of death, destruction, and religious monuments, archaeological sites being destroyed were broadcast in a cyclical pattern. So first killing people, then the next stage would be destroying archaeological sites. Then the next stage would be burning books or cultural heritage. And they would switch back and forth to images or videos displaying this particular heritage, books, statues, sites. Sadly, this pattern still continues today. This is actually images of Daesh in the Mosul Museum, destroying some of the actual statues that were there. Thankfully, these were all plaster casts. Daesh didn't know that, but they were. So, and where did this leave us with regard to archaeology and Islamic State? I'll leave you with this quote. Some of the infidel organizations say the destruction of these alleged artifacts is a war crime, he added. We will destroy your artifacts and idols anywhere. An Islamic State will rule your lands. This is an Islamic State spokesperson from 2015. And so what I want to do is show how the destruction of these sites is a direct way of destroying the link into antiquity of a particular population over time. These photos, videos, and publications are highly choreographed and edited. The publication of these reports, however, differs based on the target. So they would send out specific messages to different age brackets. Detonating an entire building is quite public, but the destruction of places that are closed to the public or isolated are used for more elaborate demonstrations. In particular, I'm referencing the destruction here shown of the Mosul Museum. ISIL had taken control of it in 2014, and it compounded the destruction as it moved forward until it was liberated. And you can see, what I want you to see is these flags, these Islamic State flags. Those are usually in the videos from their own production of the performative destruction that they then put out to different media outlets. Let's be clear, the destruction of archaeological sites was and continues to be devastating. The goal of Islamic State was to disenfranchise the local populations to their history. This meant breaking the link, like I just said, to the past and attacking pre-Islamic archaeological heritage sites. But it was also meant to target any religious groups if they felt that they were idolatrous, including Muslim sites. And you can see here that there are attacks on pre-Islamic sites and archaeological sites. Very famous ones, Mari, Duria Lopez, Apania. We're going to concentrate a lot on this region right here. While there's literally hundreds of sites damaged in one way or another by Islamic State, there are some spectacular archaeological sites worth mentioning. Unlike in Iraq, most of these sites are still far too dangerous to access and see in person. So we've been using satellite imagery to try and see what damage was caused. Of these sites, perhaps the most famous is Palmyra, pictured here above intact, and below you can see the image of the Temple of Bel is being blown up. The story is even more tragic because the loss of life of the director of antiquities at Palmyra was the result of him being murdered because Islamic State militants wanted to get into the storerooms to destroy all of the artifacts, and he would not disclose the location. Further, there are sites like Amari, where the entire site is destroyed. 1,800 looter pits and bulldozer pits across the entire site, and the citadel at Aleppo was blown up with barrels of dynamite. I promise you, it gets better. This is the heavy part. With the declaration of a caliphate state, damage to sites in Iraq were equally devastating. 3 out of the 4 imperial palaces of the Assyrian Empire, and the Parthian city of Hatra, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, sustained extensive deliberate damage meted out by Islamic State militants. Mosques have been blown up, tombs of prophets have been destroyed, including the Prophet of Jonah, ancient manuscripts burned, and museums ravaged. And just to give you a perspective, that is some sort of machine gun at Hatra, and this is a sledgehammer taking down one of the beautiful goddess images on the walls of the city of Hatra. So, literally, the Battle of Mosul occurred while we were training in Kurdistan, doing British Museum excavations, and just across the border, the battle for Mosul had began. And that was October 2016. Here's a map indicated by 2017 in the recapture of Mosul. The orange shows territories lost in 2016, including Mosul, while the black areas highlighted where they retracted to. So it's not like they disappeared, they just shrunk. The majority was still located in Syria. It was evident that action now needed to be taken to preserve and curate sites with damage that were safe to go back into in case they expanded once again. So, how did Islamic State literally turn archaeology and looting into big business? They literally turned the destruction of the sites via bombing and looting to big business and to fund their terrorist organizations, because what they would do was have the citizens of whatever region that was go and dig for particular artifacts. They would then get paid, and then they would take the artifacts and sell them. We can see it was so severe that if we look at this map, these are looted sites, primarily Syria, some in Iraq. The red dots represent severe looting, and the yellow are moderate. At the height of the looting, Islamic State began to issue its own permits to sell looted artifacts from Syria. Looting and selling continued to skyrocket between 2014 to include over 600 sites, some of them 85% looted or destroyed. In fact, it was such big business that antiquities selling became the second largest income, aside from oil, for Islamic State to be able to fund their activities. So we needed to fight back. Now, we're only archaeologists, so we were only able to help in our specialty. So what did we do? What we ended up doing, in some areas it was not safe to look, like in Syria. But we started the Blue Shield curatorial site signs, which were the protection of monuments. We did digital imaging to try and see how much damage was actually done, especially in Syria, because we couldn't be there. And we also ended up doing a heritage recording system between several different countries in order to try and preserve. So some, for example, the Palmyra arch or temple that was blown up, they had a 3D image of it prior to when it was blown up via satellite, and they were able to reconstruct it. So that's some of the fighting back we did. As a result of the Protect and Preserve Act created in 2015, we began to state that there were criminal offenses that were attached to the selling of illicit trade artifacts after 2011. And so we were able to use this and target, this is a head of a lamassu, which you will see later. It's right there. It's an Assyrian winged genie. That was found in the US immigration. So this was able to target and criminalize this activity. Fighting back means not just fighting back with looking at looted artifacts. We have to fight back in order to build habitus. So what do I mean? Islamic State tried to disenfranchise Iraqi and Syrian citizens. When I look at habitus, I look at it from a point of home. But within that, I mean the whole essence of how one lives within the community, their space, how they worship, what is their culture, and how do they identify within their larger society. Hence, to reveal the deeply ingrained dispositions, skilled values of individuals and communities after Islamic State, a multi-pronged approach is required. The process involved extensive social, cultural, and psychological reconstruction efforts. And so while Syria continued to be a hotbed, literally until last January, a massive program of restoration and cultural heritage took place. Rebuilding, we started in Mosul and began to take place partnering with the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage in Iraq. Organizations such as the US State Department or CHI, Cultural Heritage Initiative out of the US, also critically came together to try and preserve more than just the looted artifacts. And that's what I'm going to show you next. So this is the cornerstone of the Al-Nouri Mosque as it was being rebuilt. And Mosul was, like I said, the headquarters for Islamic State in Iraq. And so to restore the mosques was a fundamental social and religious importance for connecting their citizens once again to their city and their heritage. Sorry, these are cut off a little bit. This is just a slide to show that the Iraq Heritage Stabilization Program is currently working on 17 different projects.
Regina, click ahead.
That's
Trying
okay.
to fix it. Yeah.
It's totally fine. 17 different locations across Iraq and one in Syria to try and rebuild what was destroyed by Islamic State. This in particular was one initiative that in 2023 that included archaeologists at the site with architects and with UNESCO and with several other specialists around the world, turning this back into their glorious buildings. So those are modern, in modern I mean the last 200 years, efforts to try and restore cultural heritage buildings. Now I'm going to go back in time quickly and look at two very famous sites some of you might have heard of, which include Nimrud and Nineveh. How many of you are familiar with the story of the famous city of Nineveh, an imperial palace from the Neo-Assyrian Empire, known as the original, and this is now updated, the original Hanging Gardens. They're not really in Babylon, but the site's located specifically in Mosul, right at the edge of their city, and it sustained significant damage. So some of the damage was the shrine of the prophet Jonah. You can see here, and there's satellite imagery right here, and this is the beautiful landscaped area around the shrine of the prophet of Jonah. This is what it looked like after Islamic State. And so not only were Islamic State destroying their connectivity to religion and heritage, they would then allow the citizens to go and hunt through to see if they could find anything that they would like to another level of ideological warfare, if you will. We also can see this was the area, the archaeological site of Nineveh. And you can see here that this is where Nebi Yunus was, or the prophet of Jonah, same picture. And I just show you this because this is satellite imagery and on the ground imagery of the damage. So we're talking massive, massive amounts of damage. We also know that from Islamic State videos, they purported to destroy the beautiful walls of Nineveh. And although they show that there were certain areas that were blown up, thankfully they were reconstructed areas, and so it wasn't really destroying the actual walls of the city. Unfortunately, we do have, again, actual damage, and you can't see what's happening, but this is an Islamic State individual with a sander that is destroying that beautiful head that I said of the genie, of the Lamassu. Here's an image of the Lamassus at those wonderful gates. These are images of protection for the Assyrians. And of course, these genies were destroyed in a performative action. Well, you can see another, again, here's the old city, the ancient city of Nineveh, and you can see the destruction of the Mashki Gate, where it's being blown up, and literally leveled, completely destroyed. So this was a new revelation when we started to go and look and see in 2021 what sort of damage had occurred. You can see inside, these are new excavations where they uncovered beautiful cuneiform writing that they were able to have the local Iraqis. This is a local Iraqi excavation project that they bring in experts to help them with doing the scientific parts of it. And again, tunnels surveyed after the Prophet of Jonah temple was, or mosque was destroyed, there were tunnels that Islamic State had used underneath that temple, and the archaeologists, the Iraqi archaeologists, discovered brand new unknown reliefs, and you can see that these are different individuals, gods and goddesses that they never knew about before. So, you know, amongst all this destruction, we're starting to see a little bit of new information that is actually coming to light that we didn't know before. The other one I want to quickly show you is the site of Nimrud. Now, this also had several areas that were damaged, but here are the famous Lamassus from Layard, Henry Layard, a gentleman archaeologist, discovered. And here's what they looked like. Oops, over here. We had a ziggurat. Now, that is a temple that is, it's not stepped, it's slightly stepped, but it's not like a pyramid. It is an actual temple. And parts of the palace, which you can see down here, that had been reconstructed. What we ended up seeing performatively, and this is where I want you to look at these particular images here of their flags, they broadcast this. And this is the beautiful reliefs I just showed you. These are Islamic State taking them out, destroying them, and then taking jackhammers to them. Even more so, they showed in a very, again, performative way, barrels of dynamite with the whole scenes of the Assyrians with their gods and goddesses being blown up. And you can see that up in the upper panels here, what it first looked like, when it was destroyed and what it looked like after. And finally, the temple that I showed you, the ziggurat, here it is in 2016, August 31st, and here it is completely destroyed. So there was a lot of work that needed to be done in order to be able to begin to restore the cultural heritage of these archaeological sites. And you can't see that, but it says Nimrud 2022. The very first season, and I showed you those 17 sites, those very first seasons were part of this. This was the Nimrud project, where they were taking the Temple of Ishtar and trying to preserve some of the archaeology there. Now, this is all Iraqi local training on the ground. They ended up seeing this beautiful area, and I apologize for the archaeologists that are not in here because it just looks like a bunch of mud and bricks and it's boring. But I promise you, this is a temple to an ancient goddess, and we can see that there also is a little bit of Islamic State damage. So they went in and began recording and finding, again, new information that they didn't actually know about because it was uncovered from the damage of Islamic State. And finally, I want to showcase one slide, going back to, again, the British Museum Iraq Emergency Heritage Management Program. This is unique. This started right after the war stopped with the US, and what ended up happening was a site in the north, in Kurdistan, and a site in southern Iraq were chosen, and every single year for the past 7 years, we brought particular Iraqis to London for 1 month of training in everything to do with mapping cultural heritage. How do you do excavations? How do you take photography? How do you do 3D imaging? And then those same people, and we did it twice a year, would then spend a month in the excavations. So you can't really see it, but that's me training people on how to do zooarchaeological analyses. There were lectures by experts that were flown in from around the world, and then of course, one-on-one with experts on the ground. This still continues today, and the efforts that have gone beyond just this first initiative have multiplied exponentially into several different training of particular specialists in Iraq, and I'm happy to say in Syria. We finally are able to get into Syria. This is one of my colleagues, Michael Dante. He's the one that has led the Iraqi Heritage Stabilization Program. He's the director, and they have finally been able to get back into Syria and help the Syrians who have been working tirelessly to preserve their heritage, essentially in a war zone. Local and international experts are filling a government void right now and have begun the process of boots on the ground, mapping and assessing sites. They are in the forefront, and these are the talks that literally happened in February to try and link up collaborations with both European, North American specialists and Iraqi participants. So I want to end on a very good note, even though the beginning of the talk is really geared at how did this happen and why did this happen and what was their motivating factors. We can come out from that and try and not only build back the sites, but build back a sense of habitus for not only homes, but places of worship and the places that link them to their antiquity. And that's it.
Thank you, Tina. I'd like to invite people in the audience in the room to raise their hand to ask questions, but also the people online. Feel free to use the question and answer box. I also noticed there's a number of professors online and students, so if I do know who you are, I will invite you to open up and turn on your microphone and ask a question if you like. So feel free to type a little question in the box and then and or raise your hand. And I ask the same of the group here. So if anyone wants to start us off, I invite you to do so. I'm happy to start.
Okay.
Tina, you started by saying you're not a political scientist, but after many years' experience and maybe knowing a little bit about the folks and the motivation, like what is the fear of all this culture and archaeology? What is their motivation? Like what are they trying to achieve?
What is Islamic State trying to
Daesh,
achieve?
yeah.
Literally, they are trying to wipe out anything that they believe is idolatrous. And that could mean anything from medieval manuscripts to the statue of a god or a goddess from the ancient Mesopotamian cultures. It could mean any type of monument that is standing to and it's happened in Mosul, to a poet that they believed, modern day poet that they believed was not appropriate. And so I didn't put it in here. It's much more analytical, but if we look at the pie chart or we look at the demographics of who exactly Daesh were targeting, it was inclusive of any Muslim individuals or groups that they believed did not hold true to Sharia law in the most extreme sense. And so this wasn't just a blanket target on one particular group. It was a blanket target on all groups, especially pre-Islamic time periods, but also inclusive of time periods. For example, the Nebi Yunus Mosque, which was blown up. And that is technically part of what you would think would be safe if you're looking at keeping a certain narrative or a certain group's narrative. And so the motivation was wipe the slate clean, disenfranchise the population so they no longer have those visual markers to link themselves to antiquity. Part of our legitimization and who we are is linked to our antiquity. Where did we come from? And it's very visible in ancient Mesopotamia because you still have all of the monuments. And so if that link is broken, it's much easier for Islamic State to come into a community and say, we will employ you, go dig in the archaeological sites, we're going to give you more money, and they did, than what you're getting paid with your government job or your business. And by doing that, they slowly indoctrinate them into the ideology that they espouse. Make sense?
The questions from the audience?
So, Tina, thanks so much for this presentation. It's very good. Where does this take you in your own personal work, going and thinking of the next 5 years?
Interesting, very interesting talk. The British Museum project is slowly winding down in Kurdistan, but it's very much still holding true in southern Iraq. So I still continue to work on the excavations in that region, but there's a real big push for cultural heritage preservation now, as opposed to a mix of cultural heritage and excavation. The real important push, I would say right now, is in cultural heritage. So much so that even in archaeological programs right now, the number one, especially in Europe, the number one program that students want to get into is cultural heritage management. I think it's a way of understanding the people, the habitus. So where does that take me? Well, it's interesting. I'm still working there. I still work on lots of projects in Kurdistan. But I remember when I was flying in from Turkey back to Erbil, we had no idea if we were going to be shot down in a plane when we were flying over. Couldn't take a taxi because we knew that we'd be kidnapped. I don't have that anymore, thankfully. That being said, I still work in several areas that aren't exactly the bastions of stability. And so it sometimes does make me rethink, maybe I should be, I also have a project in BC along the coast of the Pacific coast, and it's really calm, and it's really nice. But I think it still just takes me back. I mean, my love is really Near Eastern antiquity. And I say this to my students, look, if you're going to choose to work in the Near East, you need to choose as an archaeologist not to be political. Because every single place you choose in the Near East, you might agree or disagree with politics or specific rules of the country, and your job is to go and dig and to see what those artifacts tell you. So that's something I've always worked on. When I worked in Turkey, we had certain rules and regulations on what we were allowed to put in our passport or in our applications of who we were and what religion we were. Same thing in Southern Iraq. So you have to be able to understand and accept, to a certain extent, certain ways or rules that happen if you want to work there. I'm used to it. I was always told, look, if you work in Israel, you're never working anywhere else in the Near East. I was told that very, very clearly. And I have colleagues that made choices. They only worked in one. I have been lucky enough that I have worked in a number of them, like I've said. So that's where it brings me.
Do you hold 2 passports?
I do indeed. Interestingly, in Kurdistan, there's no issue. You can fly in, you can be anybody, you can be any religion, any nationality, no problem. Some of the other ones a little more difficult. But yeah, I do hold 2 passports. Although with the Canadian passport, you can always hold 2. I don't know if people are aware of that. You can have 2. So unfortunately, that's sort of the lay of the land if you want to do kind of any sort of work in regions that are slightly difficult. Good question.
So we've got a couple of questions online, and with apologies to the folks online, I must have set the security settings too high. I can't turn on your microphone. I don't know why, my mistake. But the questions are concise, and so I'll offer them. I'll read them. The first comes from Jeremy Beller. He says, "Hi Tina, very interesting. You made mention of the involvement of Iraqi archaeologists. Are these people from universities or Department of Antiquities? Is there much collaboration, not just between foreign and Iraqi institutions, but also local communities for capacity building and awareness?" So sort of 2 questions. Where are these folks coming from? And secondly, about the collaboration between foreign and Iraqi institutions, but also local communities for capacity building.
Excellent question. Hi, Jeremy. Glad you're here. So the first part is, who are the people? Depending on which project I work on. If I work in Kurdistan, we work with 100% the local community, and we bring in not only specialists, like I said, from the British Museum or myself or other people from Europe. We particularly will work with people that have been chosen by the State Board of Antiquities of Iraq and Antiquities and Heritage of Iraq, SBAH. They choose each time we go in who they want trained. Now, one year it was all females, and they were all archaeology students that were doing their masters or their PhDs in Iraq. Another time it was all directorates of museums, because they needed to be able to learn this to be able to then train their staff. But we've also held workshops, we've done them online, we've done them in person, where anyone can sign up. And it can be students, it can be universities, it can be elementary. We partner with elementary schools, and we partner with the local museum staff that actually do the curation. So it's highly, highly integrated, but there also is that other level underneath where whichever city or town or village we work in, we absolutely employ and work with the local community. It doesn't work unless you bring in all the different levels of society. So that was the first part.
Collaboration not just between foreign and Iraqi institutions, but also local communities for capacity building and awareness, which you've kind of touched upon.
Okay.
Yeah. So another question comes from Tracy Jones. This is really well worded. I thought of this question as you were speaking, but she's worded it very well, I think. Compared to other efforts in various parts of the world where cultural antiquities are being purposefully destroyed, is the extent of the performative nature that Daesh employs unique?
I am certainly not an expert on the other parts of the world. However, I can certainly say within the region, it's sadly not unique. Do I think Daesh brought it to a level of sophistication that I haven't seen before? Absolutely. When I was doing the research, looking into why are they so successful? How are they getting so much territory aside from physically taking it, but having the communities do it? The level of integration of international people coming and helping Islamic State set up websites, do their publications, do their marketing, do their videos was astounding. And so it was highly, highly interconnected with their global contacts to have an extremely streamlined, sophisticated maximum extent, because they had a message. The other groups, wherever they may be globally, absolutely have a message, but the fact that I can say to you, I'm not sure to what extent they are with the rest of the world, it speaks to itself. I have not seen or heard, with exception, of other groups, say Southwest Asia or South America or any of the other areas, an international effort to see this this message get across. In other instances, unfortunately, we have seen it. And because of social media exploding, it's an easy platform. But again, in your social media, it's geared or curated to what you listen to and to what you watch. So I wouldn't necessarily get messages. I don't want to get into politics during this talk, but I do think that there are other groups that are becoming extremely savvy in terms of getting their message out. And it's very troubling, but I haven't seen it necessarily to the extent and level yet. ...
Very good. We've come to the top of the hour. I put myself on the screen so people online can see me as well. We will bring the broadcast to a close now, and I would like to thank Dr. Greenfield for both her presentation and the Q&A session. Thank you.